ATSA Architects Exhibition for their 30th anniversary. So their works are being displayed at our Gallery Serdang, so please drop by after the lecture. So we had our Putra Design Lecture Series number 1 last Tuesday on the 21st November, where we featured Datuk Sri Lim Teng Ngiom, architect Datuk Hajida, and also architect Lim Teng. So for today we have architect Shafik, and architect Dr. Ngiom, and also architect Kawa. And the session will be moderated by architect Sateerah. So please welcome architect Sateerah to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Architect Muir. All right. Okay, welcome to the session of the Putra Design Lecture Series, ATSA Architects 30th Anniversary. Today is the second session, as Architect Muir said just now. Last week we had the honor of having Datuk Sri Architect Lim Teng Ngiom, Datuk Architect Haji Hajida Abdul Majid, and Architect Lim Teng to share their diverse perspectives and insights about the field of architecture, apart from sharing their individual achievements throughout their professional journey. The convergence of different voices shape the discourse on perpetual identity. And as of today, we are delighted to have Architect Shafik Kamarulzaman, Architect Dr. Lim Teng Ngiom, and Architect Qhawarizmi Norhisham to give their fair share of valuable insights into evolving trends in architecture and how each of them contribute to the notion of perpetual identity. And we hope that the audience will also participate in an active discussion afterwards to share your thoughts, ask questions, and contribute to the collective understanding of perpetual identity in architecture. All right, to begin the session, let us see what Qhawarizmi's presentation is all about. For information, Qhawarizmi is one of the sponsors for ATSA's Architects 30th Anniversary Exhibition. So, shall I welcome Mr. Diego in front? All right, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you everyone for being here in Saturday morning, not easy. I would like to start also thanking to ATSA and UPM for giving us the opportunity to present Qhawarizmi. My presentation is going to be about the company, but also about the initiatives that we are taking to try to do our floor, a PVC floor, more sustainable. My name is Diego Ibeas. I am the Sales and Marketing Director of Qhawarizmi in Asia. My team is here around with me. We are a French company. We are located in Lyon. And among the flooring industry, we are, let's say, a medium-sized company. We have 4,500 employees. And we have been always focused on the PVC flooring and trying to impact on the design. We have 19 factories all around the world. The closest to here is in China, in Changshu. That is where Derek and myself, we are based. The company has been growing in a sustainable way from the last almost 20 years. And this has been thanks to our organic growth, not only by the increasing using of PVC floor in many applications, but also because the company has been focused in acquisitions. The three companies at the beginning, they merged, and that was the origin of Gelflor. But along the years, as I mentioned before, we grew adding other companies that they were producing alternative floorings that could increase our offer, because at the end what we want is that our customers and our partners, they are able to propose full solutions for their projects. We have global presence. As I mentioned, we are based in China, but we have also a local team here in Malaysia and Singapore. But our projects are all around the world, and very important for us is because we like to be close to the market. We like to be close to our partners, especially from the technical point of view. PVC floor, by its application, is very general, but one key factor is a proper installation. So we try to be close to the projects in order that our customers and the end users are happy with it. We focus in 10 segments, but for us the most important one is healthcare. Depending on the market, is 60 to 70% of our total turnover. We do hospitals, clinics, but we also do airports, transportation means like subway, boats, and probably the one that we are much more known is by our sport flooring. We are always at the Olympic Games, especially for badminton, table tennis, handball, and volleyball. This is just a small view of the products that we offer. Basically, homogeneous PVC floor and heterogeneous multi-layer. Those are the main product that we produce, but we also have a very niche wood floor that several teams in the NBA are using for their courts. And as we are expanding, as I said, trying to add products that are complementary, like wall finishing, also accessories for the hospital, the handrails, the security elements that will be incorporated in a project. Another very important characteristic of our company is that when we have a partner, what we want is that they have a full package of the product that they are going to offer, with all the marketing offering that is associated to it. This is the part that I will talk about how a PVC product can try to become environmentally friendly and sustainable. These are the different points of where you can focus to try to improve. And I say improve because at the end we cannot forget that PVC comes from oil. So we are an oil-based product. But what we try is, from the industrial point of view, work in every aspect that can reduce our carbon footprint. Our plants, all of them, they have solar panels to try to reduce the consumption of electricity. We also generate a lot of heat in our process, that we have turbines to generate extra electricity. We pay a lot of attention to the raw materials, and we have more and more products that are with bio content, that they use less PVC material. We recycle our own waste. We don't acquire other wastage to put in our product, because it will be very difficult to control the quality of the product. But all the excess, all the wastage that we generate, it goes back to the production. We are minimizing also the adhesive that the product needs to be installed with a product that is loose-lay. And what we are starting to work is in the last step, how to be able to collect the product once that has finished its lifespan, and remove it from the market. So this is a summary of what I mentioned. What we are trying to improve the life cycle of our product in order to be more environmentally friendly, acting in every aspect that is under our control. Unfortunately, when the product goes outside of our warehouse and is installed, that's the part that is missing, but is missing for every company in the industry, and everyone is trying to look to how to be able to collect and recycle. One of the main problems that I always transfer to my team is that our product is too good, lasts too long. We have, these days, I took the chance to be able to visit some some projects, and some of them, they have product installed for more than 9 years. And besides the natural use of it, the product is still there, is being used. Some schools where they do a very heavy duty. So what we try always is to design our products to be durable, to make sure that the end user is going to be happy with it, with the performance. The end user is going to be safe, and unfortunately we need to find new applications in order to enlarge the business, because in the reuse it is very difficult. So these are a few numbers on the initiatives that I mentioned before that we are trying to transfer. So, and this is finally the statement from the company. In Europe is becoming compulsory in many public projects that you are able to explain all these initiatives in order to be able to be in the tenders. If not, you are not qualified to be. So we believe that this trend is going to be expand to many countries. So probably in your projects in the future is an element that your customers will also would like to hear from you, that would like to understand how the product is contributing to create a much more sustainable environment. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Diego from Jaffor. Okay, Architect Shafik bin Kamarulzaman is the principal of Shafik Zaman Architect, established in 2015. He was born in Kota Baru, Kelantan, my hometown too, and later migrated to Kuala Lumpur at a very young age. His early education started at St. John's Institute, Kuala Lumpur, and he has shown his interest in arts since then. He obtained a scholarship to pursue his tertiary education at the Liverpool School of Architecture, and he was a member of the organizing committee for the Liverpool School of Architecture Centenary Exhibition, officiated by Her Royal Highness the late Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon. He excelled further with the Sikorsky Memorial Prize for his thesis project in 1996. Having obtained his Part 3, Architect Shafik spent 4 years at Kumpulan Seni Reka Architects Sdn Bhd, 1 year with RSP Architects Sdn Bhd, and 15 years at GDP Architects Sdn Bhd, and was a director in his last 8 years at GDP. Okay, to date, he has completed many notable and sizable projects locally and abroad, with many obtaining commendations and awards. So without further ado, let us welcome Architect Shafik to the front for his lecture.
Assalamualaikum and good morning to everyone. I think just a quick word, I think, before I start on the lecture proper. Just want to congratulate my friend Azim and Zul, my friends actually from quite a while back. For 30 years in practice, I think it's quite, it's a big achievement, Azim. So I think congratulations on that. Thank you for inviting me to give a talk. And thanks to all of you who are here on a Saturday morning, on a rather bleak Saturday morning. So I hope I can sort of like lighten up and make it worth your visit this morning. Also, I would like to say good morning to my esteemed colleagues, you know, practicing architects, fellow practicing architects, the moderator, of course, Prof and the university who are arranging this with Azim. And maybe if I may just quickly ask, I think in the audience, as much as I introduce myself, maybe I'd like to know, the audience consists of primarily students and architects, am I right? Okay. So because, yeah, it's important to know who I'm talking to as well. So please excuse me because normally I like to present off the cuff, but because the subject, I feel it's a bit complex actually to explain. So I'm gonna do a bit of reading. So if I bore you or if it gets a bit slow, you can always prompt me, it's okay. Okay, so basically when I was asked to talk on this subject, you know, I kind of scratched my head and thought, it's something that we've been talking about for a very long time actually in the fraternity. So I know a little bit about it, but it's very superficial, so I tried to dig and see what I can produce by way of a talk, okay? So essentially, I don't really know what identity architecture is. So maybe this is a kind of an invitation for you to walk with me and try to unravel the subject. So I just called on my experience in practice and some cursory observations. So it's not an authoritative guide by no means. And it's simply a series of thoughts that I put together to navigate the idea of identity in architecture. So it's going to get a bit wordy because identity architecture versus architectural identity, you know, it's quite tricky to negotiate these two terminologies. So what is identity architecture and what is architectural identity? In attempting to answer these sort of like complex or novel questions, I typically try to find an analogy to try and sort of make it a bit easier for everyone to follow. So I came up with this analogy. In this case, I came up with the analogy of an actor, okay? And I'll explain to you what I mean. Essentially what it is that an actor has his or her own identity. But when they take on a role, they are required to actually portray that specific identity required of the role, okay? So what I tried to do in this case, I used the Harrison Ford analogy to illustrate my thoughts. So the actor himself as a person, I compared this to architectural identity. He is able to portray a variety of identities as required by his numerous movie roles, and I compare that to identity architecture. So essentially what I mean is that, you know, like I say, as a person, obviously Harrison Ford, he's got his own characteristics, his own persona, his own identity. But when he's required to take on, for example, his very famous role as Han Solo in Star Wars, he's a rebellious smuggler, right? Which is far off from what he really is in real life. And in Blade Runner, he's Rick Deckard, you know, a hard-nosed detective. Whereas in Indiana Jones, he's a swashbuckling adventurer. So what I'm trying to say is that you can actually design, you can input certain things in order to portray a certain identity. So that's what I call identity architecture versus the natural sort of default setting of architectural identity. So in trying to unravel this question, for me it's very complex, and I don't think I have an answer this morning. I think it's just to start the conversation essentially. What I tried to do is actually to present it in 8 sections. In section 1, identity, I'll start talking about identity itself, the notion of identity, and I think that's important to establish the rest of the talk. In sections 2 and 3, I'll discuss the subject of identity as it relates to architecture. And importantly, in these two sections, I'll try to emphasize the differences, what I mean by architectural identity and what I mean by identity architecture. Following that, in sections 4 and 5, I'll discuss there have been attempts actually. It's such a famous topic that there have actually been attempts to address this subject of identity in architecture, I think both globally as well as locally. Obviously, we'll be focusing on the local examples. In section 6 and 7, I'll draw upon various examples and situations which give rise to architectural identity, and I'll then demonstrate how these same examples can then be used to produce identity architecture as I see it. And finally, if you don't mind, I'll indulge a little bit at the end and maybe use one of my projects to try to demonstrate this idea of identity architecture. Okay, so in this section, like I said before, we just explore the idea of identity itself first. So I think for decades, Malaysian architects have explored the idea of identity and how it's portrayed in our architecture. Why are we so preoccupied with identity? Could it be a consequence of our search for an identity as a nation? Having obtained independence relatively recently in 1957, maybe this is the natural path for a young country because we're still relatively young. So as we mature, this tussle with national identity may be discussed objectively through the lens of our architectural landscape, okay? It appears that identity is crucial in the sense of how we view ourselves as well as how we wish to be viewed. So I think a lot of this is actually, a little bit more than just architecture. So I like to think of what we do actually is about the human condition. So then what is architectural identity and what is identity architecture? Is there a difference? So in my opinion, I think identity architecture is the answer for our pursuit of architectural identity. And I hope to answer this or to explain it as we go along. So second section of what I call architectural identity, I'll discuss the subject of identity as it relates to architecture and how a particular architectural identity is acquired. The very common and obvious example I use here, simply because I think everyone is very familiar with it, and I'm fond of it as well. I think architecture can be identified by its local, regional, and historical traits. So based upon this premise, architectural identity is manifest in characteristics and forms which emerge from contextual conditions. So for example, what we see in front of us is the traditional Malay house, the kampung house, and essentially it's got cultural traits whereby it's friendly but private. You've got the railings which go all the way down and the windows which are very open. The cliche is that you sit there and you talk to your neighbors as they pass by. So you're friendly, you have this kind of a community spirit, but at the same time you have privacy because the spaces are arranged in sequence. So from a very open veranda, you go into your private space. And then obviously it's elevated, and the fact that it's elevated is a response to climate, because we flood frequently. We used to flood a lot more frequently. It's also a response to the natural habitat where you have wild animals, so it keeps you safe. There's a lot of use of screens to allow natural ventilation and light to infiltrate the house. And obviously, you've got pitched roof to deal with the rain and the heat, because obviously the heat collects and dissipates and the rain just runs off. And finally, there's a use of technology of the time, which is carpentry, which back then I think a lot of Malays, during the off period of fishing, the boatmen used to actually construct these Malay houses. So I think this is a very good example of the idea of a local identity encapsulated in architecture. So, architectural identity is acquired through an evolutionary and natural process. Again, the example of buildings with clear architectural identity are those which reflect their context. In this case is the traditional Malay house. You have the traditional Chinese shop house, and you have the long houses of Borneo. So I move along to this third section in which I explained my initial idea of identity architecture. I aim to distinguish how this differs from architectural identity, because at first glance they may appear to be the same thing, but in fact I contend that architectural identity and identity architecture are like the opposite sides of the same coin. In contrast to architectural identity, identity architecture is the intentional act of shaping forms to project a desired identity. So that's my position. In this respect, identity architecture is the polar opposite of architectural identity. It is the preconceived imposition of design elements which represent a particular identity, and the end result is what I term as identity architecture. Architectural identity is the organic response to external and internal factors, whereas identity architecture is purposeful by design. So I mean, in this case, I think it's pretty obvious. What I'm trying to say here is that you have a tree which is shaped by nature and grows naturally into a form that's quite pretty, and because we like it, we want to replicate that sort of like in miniature in our own house, you know. So we have the example of the bonsai. So, you know, so I think this is, I hope it's kind of clear how I perceive the two sides of the same coin to be in this example. Maybe I'm moving too fast. We might finish this too soon. I don't know, some of you might be too young to know who Harrison Ford is. I just realized that when I actually put it on slide, some of my staff also don't know who is Harrison Ford. Then I feel really old, so. Okay. Anyway, I think you guys more or less know, like, you can Google him. So in moving along in this section 4, modernism and architectural identity. So I will discuss the attempts that were made historically to inject identity into architecture through modernism. So many architects in Malaysia are rooted in the modernist design philosophy, at least in my generation and back. So moving forward, I don't know what you guys are rooted in, okay? And modernism, you know, it's based on the idea of discarding the use of embellishment and decoration in favor of stripped down minimalist aesthetic. And this is exemplified by a series of buildings in the University Malaya campus. So whilst these attempts produced notable modernist icons, I think we all admire the architecture. Until today, I have great respect for the works that were done there. But it is questionable if they were successful in producing a Malaysian identity per se. Ostensibly, the modernist aesthetic is greatly at odds with Malaysian culture, climate, and geography. I mean, this is just an example where, you know, modern architecture fits its context beautifully. In this case, it's the Seagram building in New York. Whereas when you try to transplant this design of modernist aesthetics into a local context, it becomes quite challenging, you know, and the question arises if whether or not this is the right thing that we ought to be doing. It's quite old, sorry, the examples are quite old, but I think they're still relevant. But nevertheless, the rapid development of our nation has seen the assimilation of modern sensibilities into local architecture. So what do I mean by that? I mean, this is a great example. Another building that I actually admire a lot, which is our National Mosque. So it's a very successful, I think, version where modernist principles are actually injected and do actually portray some local identity into the architecture. So perhaps the time is right for the pursuit of identity architecture. And this may simultaneously address and satisfy our fascination with architectural identity. Next, I would like to talk about this. This is a, it's a loaded topic. I think a lot of us have talked about it over the years within our own private circles as well as publicly. Symbolism and architectural identity. So again, historically, there were a lot of efforts made to inject identity into architecture, and like it or not, I think in many cases, symbolism was actually used to do that. So in the enthusiasm to create a Malaysian identity, many architects explored the adoption of signature forms associated with various cultures. From the National Museum to the Bank Muamalat HQ, used to be Bank Bumi Putra in nowadays, to the Daya Bumi Tower, and to the Royal Chulan Hotel. I think such attempts were employed to encapsulate our identity in architecture. I would say, apart from the architectural fraternity, these attempts were successful to a certain extent. Gradually, however, I think such solutions didn't gain traction and were eventually abandoned for more popular architectural expressions. So moving on, I'll try to talk about architectural identity and exemplify it to sort of reinforce the idea of how I see that being different to identity architecture. So, as we all know, I think Malaysia is a diverse country. It's a melting pot for a variety of cultures. Each culture brings with it a unique identity. So culture is definitely one aspect of identity. Identity also reflects climate and geography. So when I was studying in Liverpool, this is something that hit me actually sort of like full frontal. The fact that different cultures behave differently simply because of the climate sometimes, maybe it's just that's the sole strong factor that affects how people behave culturally. Because in England, they have this very popular pub culture, right? So, and because they don't have the sun, so the sun sets early, so everyone leaves and they have their social life actually begins at the pub, because you don't have an outdoor kind of a environment like we have in Malaysia, which we take for granted sometimes. So I think climate and geography actually have a great impact on identity. So obviously these two, climate and geography, they are interrelated and interdependent. I think we all know that. And climate obviously varies by region and geography. Hence why we have all the various identities around the world. And geographical formations in turn are shaped by the climate. So the fourth and less discussed factor, I think, in forming identity is technological advancement. So indeed, identity is closely related to tech advancements brought about by progress and the futuristic aesthetics that accompany it. Therefore, I conclude that identity is influenced by four main factors, namely culture, climate, geography, and technology. In order to better understand these influences, we can look to simple examples which demonstrate each on its own merit. Cultural influence is expressed by the adoption of forms and symbols specific to a culture. So you can see, we love mosques, okay? I think Azim, Zul and myself, we have that very much in common. I'm sure a lot of you do as well. However, it's inadvertently always tied to the symbolic form as we know it. Like it or not, it's prevalent, okay? So the dome, the minaret, these are symbols. Climatic factors, on the other hand, dictate the use of deep roof overhangs to address the tropical sun and rain. So in Malaysia, as we've seen frequently, this is something that is easily adopted in modern architecture, right? It transcends. It's simply the need to keep the rain and the sun out. So geographical considerations are expressed by the use of locally sourced materials. So based on my cursory research, the Alfamosa is actually built out of bricks which were sourced from nearby, which were in abundant supply when it was built. So again, it gives the building an identity which is actually reliant on the geographical formation at the locality. And finally, technological advancements define architectural identity through the use of aesthetics, in this case of 3D printed construction. So we're sort of like moving in in a direction I can't predict, but this could be one of the prevalent aesthetics that we end up adopting into our identity, architectural identity. Okay, now I will explain identity architecture, right? How does that differ from architectural identity? I hope you guys are not lost. So I kind of got lost as well when I prepared this. But I will wrap it up so that at the end, hopefully everything comes together, okay? So in general, identity architecture sets out to embody the culture, climate, geography, and technologies of the place and time. These factors can be translated into a series of programmatic formulas, okay? It's a very abstract terminology, so you go to different people, they have different formulas. I think designers, that's the beauty of what we do. But nevertheless, it's a very helpful tool. These formulas can then be applied onto the design process, and language can be created using grammar, structure, and composition, which are shaped by the context. So arguably, I think nowhere else is identity architecture more important than in religious buildings. These must be easily recognizable, yet fit for their intended use. Mosques, cathedrals, and temples have the dual task of accommodating large crowds of worshippers as well as intimate religious functions. Therefore, the main identifiable differences would very much depend on the outlook and physical appearance of the buildings. In this case, identity architecture is an invaluable solution. But as architects, we have to survive, so we have commissions and we have to pander to clients' requests. So what I'm saying here is that in commercial projects, identity architecture can be used to reflect the qualities and ideals of an establishment. This requires us to differentiate the design and impart upon it the particular branding of the client. So banks and multinational companies' headquarters use this to great effect. The qualities they wish to impart are demonstrated in the architectural designs employed. Again, another old example. So I think the slides are showing my age, okay guys? But I think it's still very relevant. Everyone still, I notice this still appears in Instagram, so it's not that outdated, okay? Early examples include the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank in Hong Kong, which showcases a clear structural system and public-friendly spaces. So, it's the company trying to project some of their inherent traits, or at least the traits that they want to publicize. And then the Lloyds Bank in London, which places structures and services exposed in an attempt to reflect integrity in operations. Okay, this is a bit contemporary, so I don't just show old examples. So, and like Apple products, the HQ in California is a complete ecosystem, so the design, the architecture, the identity in the building, of the master plan, is actually reflecting the identity of the company. In the pursuit of identity architecture in Malaysia, the various influencing factors can be expressed individually or as a collective. So this would largely depend upon which aspect of the identity one wishes to highlight. So in a way, it gives us a lot of power, right? Because we become like the conductor. We decide when the violin plays, when the cello comes in. So I view it as a kind of a good tool, But in order to portray the desired identity accurately, the various influences would have to be projected in carefully calibrated doses. Hence, the measure of success of identity architecture is the balanced manifestation of the various influencing forces. So I don't know how many minutes am I in, is it Prof? Laju sangat Prof? Okay, yeah. So because I'm into the final stretch of the run. In this final section, I present a project from my office as a case study on how identity architecture can create or reinforce an architectural identity. Now, I'm not going to lie to you because this is pretty old. I think it's 2019. So back when I designed it, it's not as though I had this at the front of my head, right? Identity architecture, you know, it's like, how do I, but obviously as architects, we do consciously work to the brief that is required of us, given by the client. And also, to a certain extent, we also want to, you know, do justice to the design and to the, it's an opportunity, right? So I think that's essentially what this project is demonstrating. And when I look back at it, coincidentally, it does have those characteristics of actually reflecting an identity that was required of the building. So the practice of architecture involves the translation of context into built form. Therefore, identity architecture is the purposeful act of externalizing and expressing the spirit of the culture, place, and epoch. In this is a Jackson Pollock painting. This, arguably, many people say like he's the greatest painter in our lifetime, living painter at that time, and it's just very expressive, you know. So I was thinking this is a good example. You know, we should maybe sometimes, although we work to certain formulas, although we work to certain rules, regulations, but we also, you know, we want to be expressive. So perhaps this is a tool that allows us both freedom and, you know, a little bit of guidance. So we recently put this hypothesis to the test in one of our projects. We were commissioned by a renowned developer to design a small is the key word lah, because my office is also very small temporary mall. This was intended as a stopgap measure for the burgeoning development whilst waiting for it to mature. So you know, it's very, I mean, I think you guys know where this is. It's a very popular strategy to inject certain catalysts within a development whilst waiting for the rest of it to catch up. So we were sort of like the guinea pigs lah. So the design was required to reflect characteristics associated with commercial retail development, i.e. open, welcoming, and inviting. The building had to be erected quickly with a relatively modest budget, and this had a direct impact on the look and feel and hence identity of the building, since it governed the materials and construction technique. The client also desired a design which was recognizable as their flagship product with their trademark gable roof. This is a form they famously introduced as a signature for their residential developments, which has since been regularly adopted by many others. Good or bad, I'm not sure. So this distinctive architectural identity drove us to devise a formula of repetitive hexagonal volumes arranged in parallel. These were conceived to convey the gable form in a novel and memorable way, thus injecting a new twist without losing too much of the original DNA. The hexagons were built using tubular steel frames for expedience of construction. Metal screens, glazing, polycarbonate sheets, and metal roofs were utilized for varying degrees of transparency. The hexagonal spaces were placed along the external perimeter, enabling the central body to be expressed as a large atrium. By doing so, we were able to retain some crucial aspects of the client's established identity and at the same time introduce an identity appropriate to the building use. This hangar-like space was roofed over with a barrel vault, into which the gable roofs of the hexagons could terminate. So this commission enabled us to put into practice the premise of identity architecture. We viewed the brief and context as crucial ingredients and variables within this formula. So as you can see, these are marketing collaterals that were produced by the client. So you can see that there's a kind of a consistency in terms of how the identity starts to get projected across all collaterals that were coming out. And even, I think, during the construction phase, you could begin to pick up the sense of the identity that was intended to be projected, as well as the unintended aspects of the identity that arose through the nature of the construction. In this case, it was a composite system whereby we were using RC for the lower floors and steel. So it's a balance, because we obviously wanted to use a full steel construction, but because of the budget, we had to compromise, so it became a hybrid system. So by tapping onto the client's signature style, the site context and the currency of the brief, we were able to develop a formula. We made use of this formula to produce an architectural design that projected the identity of the client and the building functionality. This formula allowed us to create an architecture informed by an established architectural identity, whilst responding to the contextual forces of the place, the client, the brief, and the time. So even the skylights are hexagonal. You can't quite pick it up, but we managed to squeeze that in without getting too much objection from the client. So the result is what I would call identity architecture in a sense. By using the identity of the client and the brief, and the climate and the geography of the place, and the technology available to us, we were able to introduce an architecture with an identity reflecting those influences. In the same way that an actor who has his own distinct identity is able to assume any role required of him, as long as the parameters of that role or identity are clearly identified and contextualized. So in summary, architectural identity is an evolutionary process that continues to develop. Architectural identity is acquired through a natural process of exposure to contextual forces. In the analogy of the actor, he continues to develop, right, throughout his life, and that identity will also go through modifications or changes as he grows, as he ages. Identity architecture is like a snapshot of that actor taken at various points in his life, and it is usually staged or choreographed or to project or impose specific aspects of an identity by design. So therefore I contend that architectural identity is perpetual. It grows and develops subject to context, whereas identity architecture is fleeting. It is an interpretation of the context imposed upon the design at any one moment in time. So I think with that thought, I leave you. I thank you very much, and the end of my presentation today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Architect Shafik. Interesting talk on identity. Yeah. Quite philosophical to in the start, and confusing in a way to really identity architecture and architecture identity, but he managed to explain it well. All right. Okay. For those wanting to collect CPD points for today, there is a QR code at the door above, so you can scan, or you can also inform the secretariat. You can register your CPD manually. Right. Okay, we'll go to the next speaker, Architect Dr. Lim Teng Ngiom. He's the founder of Ngiom Partnership, an architect with conscience, wary about the going-ons in the world, and by observation, and believes that we are at the threshold of civilizational shift. Being one of the renowned architects around, Dr. Lim has experienced and seen it all in architecture, where his firm has won also notable awards and competitions. But in the bigger scheme of things, architecture is not the most important thing. According to Dr. Lim, when younger, we could say carpe diem, seize the day, make your lives extraordinary. Now older, or should I say wiser, he would say, "'Twas always thus and always will be." Let's invite Dr. Lim to the stage.
Good morning, all. Thank you all for being here, and thanks, Azim. I know Azim for a long time as well. Used to party together in those days, 30 years ago. You should see what it was like those days. So anyway, we move on in time, etc. Yeah, congratulations to 30 years of practice. This was ours. As she got bigger, we got smaller. So anyway, perpetual identity is something that it's quite a slippery thing to try to engage, actually, because actually identity changes over time, context, geography. Because Shafik touched on that, and there's some crossover there, and quite rightly so that climate plays a part as well, in identity as well. So we can't really fix it, and Shafik also pointed out that there can be a real willfulness in creating identity architecture. So at the beginning is a willful thing, later on it may be adopted to become representative of a particular identity, in architecture. Anyway, just arrived from overseas last night, still recovering. So anyway, this is sort of a prequel to a book that came out called Evolution, published by PAM. You can get the book, there were 21 writers in there. So I was thinking about identity, and so to me, further back to the past, actually, what really, okay, let's accept that identity is slippery thing, changes over time, so on. Let's look at what our identity was like in the distant past, a long time ago, which 99% of us do not remember. I didn't know until I worked on the book, that our architectural legacy goes back 2,000 years, In fact, the book was supposed to be 100 years sort of thing, but our legacy is actually 2,000 years. And I will bring you back further in time, So something that's really, really totally lost in my memory, So, okay, let's begin. Next, do I press something? Yeah, okay. Yeah, where we are long time ago, right? This map is produced by European seafarers, and all the world that they knew then around here was what they sort of know along the coastline. And look at the size of Malaya, that's crazy, You see that? You can see that next to India on your left, right? And the minuscule Sumatra, is really, the scale of things is based on their importance and how much time they spend on our land, and that shows how important it was then. This was before, they eventually sail around the world and all that. This is a slightly later map. Okay, you see Borneo there emerging. They never got around to sailing the southern part of Java, so it all disappeared, and so on. So this was, let's say, probably around 14th century, these two maps. Okay, so what our importance back then, right, was actually something to do with seafaring vessels from west to east, and from the density of west to east was India at the time, and you could see that the way the vessels sail into Malaya, right? You have the coast that sort of runs along the peripheral of Burma, Thailand, and so on, and there's another southern route to Sumatra. But to Malaya, it was the best way to get from India or Middle East towards Asia, and so on. So they stopped at a particular spot, called the Bujang Valley in Kedah, you know. So over time, Bujang Valley has been taken over by Malacca later on. But earlier on, you know that the Bujang Valley preceded all the big civilization in Asia. You think about Indonesian various civilization there, and Indochina. So we can include let's say, you know, if you know a bit about Javanese history, you can trace it back to 9th century, you know. If you know a bit about Indo-China history or Cambodian history, you can trace it back to Angkor Wat from 9th to 12th century and so on. But in the Bujang Valley in Kedah, right, you could be dated back to late BC and AD period. It's before all of this, you know. So that's what it was. The Merbok River, you could go there and take a look at the museum there, Bujang Valley Museum. Very interesting artifacts and so on. And near the museum, there are ruins, archaeological diggings which have been shifted from lower plains towards nearer to the museum. So the museum did this drawing, actually, the National Museum, and they speculated that it was a bit like that. And if we were to look at 19th century port in Indonesia, I think that it has been continuing like that up to the 20th century, early 20th century. So the whole land here will actually revolve around seafarers, sailing vessels, and so on. And actually, the architecture here are very much influenced by that, you know, including what Shafik suggested, you know, the couple house built by boat builders. But actually, it goes further back, and all these native buildings from Sulawesi to Sumatra, like the Minangkabau, people think it looks like buffalo horn or whatever it is. I suggest that it's actually more like a boat, you know, going back to the past, actually. And there is a reason why it was so important, and we can look at that later. So this was a cave painting extracted from that done 10,000 years ago, you know. There are similar paintings which are found in various spots in Southeast Asia, including, say, in Sarawak in the Philippines, parts of Indonesia, and so on, that sort of feature sailing vessels. This is what you have in the Bujang Valley. This is actually a first century remnant of a Hindu chandi or Hindu shrine. Okay, this is dated first century, but there are other ruins which were dated by British archaeologists to late BC period. So actually, this is the prevailing culture, you know, for a few hundred years, at least 500 years, spreading from Merbok River here to other parts of Asia, you know. So this was like, it was only rediscovered in the 1960s, you know. So before then, we knew like next to nothing about 2,000-year heritage actually. And here you go again. It's very much like the planning of the Hindu shrine, which is still being done today. Actually, if you look at say, the shrine built illegally or whatever it is, it's actually the same plan, It's amazing. I mean, of course, this sort of plans has been dated back to very much earlier than even the Mobok river findings. And then you could see that over here, the roof was built from timber structure, because you could still see the indentation, right, where the columns are planted. And that is the Vimana, I think, so-called. It's a sort of a raised structure, which is done by the indigenous material, which is timber in this country. Here, these are the print as well for that. So the museum did a model, and you won't find that model anymore because it's disappeared. So they showed this for a while. Now I don't know why the model has disappeared now. So you could see that the section roughly shows sort of generic kind of planning from that period until today, actually. And these are the things that which was found over there. And of course, in this country being tropical, it looks a bit like a pagoda and so on because of the weather, right? And then these are the first Hindu shrines in Java, okay? Again, rediscovered by European explorers in the 19th century only. And this is dated 7th to 8th century. The one at the Bujang Valley was 1st century, So it sort of spread, not very quickly, but over time. Yeah, this one. Actually, when the explorer found this, there were 400 chandis, emerging from a lake. So they were sunken there. And when they drained the lake, the local farmers took the stone to build something else. So this is what you have left out of 400. So that shows that what we have lost in this region is quite enormous, because people they don't care much about the historical past, right? It's not in their interest, in daily living that counts. So we have Borobudur, which is 9th century, and rediscovered in 1814. Okay, 9th century, this is the biggest Buddhist temple in the world, near to Yogyakarta. If you haven't been there, you need to take a look at it. It's quite an amazing thing. And it is built like a pyramid. We can talk about pyramid later on. And there's a speculation that this temple was built on top of another pyramid, which is dated much earlier. Of course, you can't really dismantle and check what the old pyramid looks like, So that's a speculation for this building. So it sort of rises like a pyramid, yeah. And maybe it's a memory of what some sort of memories of old architecture that was here before, actually. Some vague memory, but otherwise, why build it this way? Because even Buddhist temples don't look like this. This is quite a unique thing. And then of course, on top of it, it's quite it's overlooking the landscape. You see some volcanic mountains in the foreground. Of course, all these ruins, they were buried for hundreds of years, right? They were lost they were covered by foliage, jungle, and so on. The memory of this was actually lost, and only when the Europeans, archaeologists or explorers pursued it, they really pursued it to find out what's behind all this sort of leftover ruins, etc., that we get to know our history. Otherwise, we would not know. Even like the the Bojang Valley was only rediscovered in the 1960s, you know. Before that, we have no memory of it. So in the Barbados carvings, there have a lot of carvings that sort of talk about the narrative of journeys, but of course it's not to do with Buddhism and so on. But sailboats are featured there, again, quite strongly. And here's another one. And if you look at this carving, and also the rock paintings, right, the scale are quite similar, you know. So why? Don't know, unless somebody work it out. Perhaps it was about the manageable scale, you know, of boat building at the time. So this was this is another one which was near Barbados in Java as well. You could actually see from Barbados to Prambanan. This was discovered a bit earlier, 9th century AD, again after the Bojang Valley settlement. So this was what it was like, you know, quite mysterious and so on. You know, what was the past like? So there was a lot of work trying to piece together a narrative for this kind of architecture. So eventually, Shafik shows something like that, you know, from Balan. So you end up like that, then you can recognize it, you know. And when you recognize it, it's exactly the same as some of the temples that you find in India, in Rajasthan, actually. Exactly, you know. So there you go with that. So this is a very interesting plan to me. I think there's some cosmic significance to this. No one has said what it is, but I think it's worth finding out. You know, like the main chandis are surrounded by smaller ones all around it. Maybe there's some cosmic significance to this. Need to do a bit more research on that. I think it's really interesting, and it's quite symmetrical as well, and quite exacting. You know, exacting. Why should anything like that be so exacting? But it is so exacting, you know. So this is the typical kind of Vimana, what, you know, the shrine in there. So you have these various chambers, and you find this kind of chambers in very old edifices, you know. I mean, I'm not going to speculate, but even the Cheops pyramids, right, in Egypt, you have the king's chamber, you have the queen's chamber, this chamber and that chamber behind the stone. And also later on I'll show the really super ancient discovery in Java, also speculated to have chambers as well. So what do they mean? This is probably inherited from a long lost past, actually. You know, Hindu civilization, I mean Hindu sort of civilizations is older than almost anything else. So you have that. Yeah, this is the Shiva temple in Rajasthan. This is also dated 10th to 12th century. You know, it actually coincides with Angkor Wat, which we'll show later on, which has some water bodies around it, very important to them. But you look at the top, it's very similar to Prambanan, and about the same period when it was constructed. So if you read his historical writings, they will say that Prambanan, Barbados, and even Angkor Wat were built by local craftsmen. I just wonder, you know, I think that maybe at least the supervisors came from India, and it's almost identical. So this Angkor Wat, discovered again in the 19th century, rediscovered. This is a bit later, dated 12th century. I used to think that it's so mysterious, right, Angkor Wat, that you don't really know who built it. But lately they worked out a series of kings, you know. The first king was driven from Vietnam to Cambodia in the 9th century by the Cham people. Cambodia came from Cham. There were another group of Cambodians. So these are the Angkor people. They went west and fantastic agricultural land. And they started building this. They settled in the 9th century, but this was built around the 12th century. Angkor Wat is a very fascinating thing. In the 12th century, right, it's got a population of 150,000. In those days, it's a big city. Say you compare to London, it had a population of 30,000 in those days. And the extent of Angkor city is the same as modern Berlin. Can you imagine that? I don't have the plan here, but if you take a Google map of Angkor Wat, you see all the river canals surrounded. And in this very precise sort of construction for the water not to say spill over and so on and so forth, and there's flood mitigation, and then there's agriculture and so on. Anyway, you can try to Google it. It's very fascinating. So this is Angkor Wat. You can look again at the structures. It's so similar to other structures in Southeast Asia. So these are charm temples. They're the one that drove the Angkor people westward, So they also had this sort of bit different, but again you can see the Buddhist Hindu influence from the past. By the way, the Vietnamese people are different from the Cham and the Angkor people. They are totally different actually. They don't really belong to that same kind of genre of culture and civilization. So they are quite different. Okay, even a long time ago. Sorry. Okay, so let's look at this. Say that the major ice age, right, is taking back to 21,000 years earlier. So during the ice age, at that time, the sea level was 125 meters below present. So our land here is called Sunderland, not Sunderland Football Club. It's Sunderland, right? Which sort of join the Malay archipelago, Philippines, to Indochina. It's a huge tract of land. And if you were during that time, right, the northern countries was under kilometers of ice. In fact, in New York at that time, the thickness of ice was higher than the Empire State Building. So nobody lived there. But along the equator, this is my own speculation, that this must have been a major civilization during that time. So anyway, this was a map that shows the migration from Africa. Then you have the southern coastline, right? Then from there they reach all the way to Australia. And there's another migration northward. Okay, these are done by archaeologists actually. Later on, geologists contribute as well. So you can see the timeline that, okay, from 130, they say 200,000, but let's say 130,000 years emergence from Africa. They arrived at Australia 65,000 years ago, and maybe in Southeast Asia 65,000. 65,000 years ago. So anyway, from the north, the North America and Europe was joined. So there wasn't the Bering Sea, so they crossed over to the later civilization. So this was I drew the equator there just to show you where Sunderland is, where we are. And this is, you can see that the biggest tract of land that's sort of submerged into the sea, right? It's actually Sunderland, And it's obvious, that it was a very luscious kind of land. And as you look at the north, this ice was just covered the whole of the north and the northern hemisphere. So, okay, that is a better map of it, shows how large it is. Okay, then recently in 1970s, as late as that, they discovered this in Java, Gunung Padang, Java, built up on lower structure which was dated 25,000, 14,000 years ago. There's another lower structure. So over time, they built it up with soil and then with stones construction as well. And you were to look at the Sunderland again. This is the highest peak towards the south. So there was some significance there. So remember, 25,000 years ago, the land was all joined together, and it was cold, during that period. So these are the stone construction that was done, estimated 7,900 to 6,100 BC. This preceded the Buddhist Hindu edifices or structures that we saw earlier on. In fact, there were some archaeologists who know it cannot be that old. It must have belonged to the late BC, early AD period. But you just look at the style of architecture there, and construction is totally different. There's no way that belongs to the Buddhist Hindu period, It's really, really lost in time, the old culture there. Okay, so, there was a topsoil and stone terracing added over time, 2,000 to 11,000 BC. Okay, this imaging at the bottom picture only came out this year, done by Indonesian archaeologists. His name is there, and it was published in the Archaeological Journal, right? So there was imaged out or also visualized from research. Apparently, the hollowness in the mound. But we don't know. I don't really know, because they say that all done by, constructed from research. What research, I don't really know. But currently, they're putting probes into the ground to test it. So let's see, they've just started that. So we can look at this is actually taken from the ice core that was sort of inserted into hundreds of meters of ice in Greenland in the year 2000. You won't see the year very clearly here, maybe next one year. You can see that around on the left, right? The time periods from the right to left. You can see that there were various catastrophes. Actually, the ice age was supposed to continue from, say, 20,000 until whatever, But then there was a series of catastrophes, right? You can see the spike in temperature, and it came down again, It came down temperature. And then you see the Younger Dryas was around 11,600 years ago. A sudden spike in temperature, right? And there was a time when the big land mass was submerged in the sea because of, must be the melting of the ice. Some speculated that the ice melted the northern hemisphere because of asteroid impact in North America, okay? A lot of contention in this kind of hypothesis, a lot of disagreement. For me anyway, I look by observation, not by the data. So this was the yellow ellipse was the spike in temperature that shot up, so all this land disappeared during that time. Okay, this is interesting. We have a lot of discussion on climate change. You can see that, you look at old paintings and so on of the Middle Ages, you see snow everywhere and people skating on frozen rivers, etc., right? So you could see that the temperature was dropping, and then suddenly it went up after the Industrial Revolution. So it shot up like crazy, right? It shot up, and it's still going up in the moment. And people say that, of course, data as well show that, because of humankind intervention, So where does that take us? That's a question. We don't control climate change, for example. But look at this other graph here. This was taken in the Antarctic ice core in 2001. It went down 2.2 miles all the way down. So this was intended to sort of chart temperature anomalies over 1,000. And you could see there's a constant, when temperature spike up and then goes down, roughly around over a period of 75 to 100,000 years. So we are at the far right there. Even though our climate change is so alarming, you can see that it's still not like that far different from what was there in earlier times. So what was it like in the past? I don't know. There are a lot of speculation again. So there we go. This Cape Africa that you landed in Sunderland over the coastal line, arriving in Australia for 50,000, 40,000 years later. The near caveman was found and dated to 40,000 years, and there were various the earliest paintings was dated, the cave paintings, 40,000 years, but I think the Niao case was dated 10,000 years. So most of these paintings were estimated more than 10,000 years old. So which means that around the end of the last ice age, let's put it that way, And what do they show? What do they depict? Are these, boats and so on? That's why the culture, the memories of culture here. We look at the discussion of indigenous architecture, shapes of architecture and so on. I think it has a lot to do with seafaring. So obviously because of the locality, climate, fertility, or so on and so on, the earliest civilization was probably there, maybe, I don't know, in Sunderland. And then later on they move up. But not forgetting also the migration from Africa from along the west to the north as well. So the archaeological sites, which are stone remnants, around the same time were found in different parts of the world. Say in Britain, right? Those of you been in Britain, what's that called? That stone. Yes, Stonehenge. Yeah. So same kind of stone. You remember looking at the picture of Gunung Padang, right? Similar as well. So what does that tell you? I don't know. No. So anyway, there were also hypotheses about, but this was probably the Atlantis that they were talking about. I don't know. They say Plato took from Solon that Atlantis was west of the Pillars of Hercules, which is Gibraltar. Most people think that it's in the Atlantic Ocean and so on. This is very far from there. So there are more than these two books actually that suggest that Atlantis probably is in Sunderland. So there you go, ancient cave paintings. And this is just to bring you to the Hindu-Buddhist culture. This is in Bali, okay, Balinese dance, Thai dance, okay. Thai ceremonial dance, Cambodian, and then Indian, right? And we have our own, in the northern Malaya, until recently, this was considered part of our culture, but now prevailing sentiment tend to subvert what we have inherited over time, you know. So is it worth, like, say, trying to make an effort to preserve what was there before at least we have some memory, or what, you know, just let it be, like, taken over by prevailing sentiments? Anyway, I just threw this in because we're discussing about identity architecture. So we did this some years ago. It was for a competition in Egypt. We were actually at that time we were trying, because it was a competition, therefore you are free without your client constraints, you know. Therefore, we were looking at something we could identify with at the site, which was mainly desert dunes and so on. So these were some of the initial drawings that we were doing. So in fact, the whole project was constructed from line drawings, actually, to capture the lines of the sand dunes and the sea waves, you know. So it was meant to cross over time to the past and link the past to the present. So this is what we came up with. All the rooms are beneath this. The roof and the land merged together. So we undulated it. It's all concrete shell structure, actually. And yeah, we sort of, we realized we have to think about human scale, blah, blah, blah. So we intentionally spent a lot of time trying to meet that. And there was a requirement for a park, and this was it, you know. And this was what we did. I didn't show the section, I couldn't find it actually, but this was what eventually resulted in the landscape, you know. The big funnel to the top is actually an observation tower. The view to the Giza pyramid from there, you can see right across there. Beneath are all the workable spaces and so on. It's actually like a miniature city beneath it. And it started from the plan on the left, which has resulted in a lot of line drawings. We spent several weeks just drawing lines, you know, and we thought that if we don't get it, we just abandon it, you know, until we get to the point where we think, yes, you know, we can do a plan from there. Of course, you got to tweak, and the plan consists of what? You know, circulation, roads, etc., etc. And this was the eventual aerial perspective of the scheme. The initial lines were right at the top. Then we're going to make it work, you know, introduce circulation, secondary routes, start zoning, etc. It was quite fun at the time. This is something that I did, you know, in case we all end up with nothing left, you know. So here we go. Thank you.
Okay, interesting insights, Dr. Ngiom, taking this back to history, very long time ago. Okay, since Dr. Ngiom was already talking about very old history, let me just take this opportunity to mention that Dr. Ngiom, I was told that also a long time ago, sometime in 1997, 98, he was the first architect actually to come up with the supporting paper to the establishment of UPM's architecture's bachelor's program. So we'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of UPM to express our gratitude to Dr. Ngiom for his contribution. Okay, our last speaker for today is architect Qhawarizmi Norhisham, fondly known as Architect Qhawa, is a firm believer in the continuous discipline in honing the craft of design thinking. Had his architectural training at the University Technology Mara, UiTM, University of Technology Sydney, UTS, and AEDES, Metropolitan Laboratory, Berlin, and Politecnico di Milano in Italy. Architect Qhawa runs multiple practices as principal of Qhawarizmi Architect, director of Practica Architects Neighborhood, and partner of a research think tank, Manifesto of Design and Research in Architecture, MDRXA. In his academic career, he has lectured for a collective 8 years at UiTM, Taylor's University, and also UCSI University. Architect Qhawa is a well-known award-winning architect with over 40 awards accomplished, and he is currently serving as PEM's council member and Malaysian representative in Arcasia Committee of Young Architects. Other than that, he is the recipient of Khazanah Design Residency, PEM Chan Saulai Award, and also PEM Johnson Swiss Scholarship Award. So let me welcome Architect Qhawa to the front for his lecture.
Thank you so much, Azim and Zul. Thank you so much for having me. I mean, starting from writing for the book preface, and then eventually having me in the morning today. I was expecting a little bit more students, so bear with me. There's a lot of the iklan sikit in the front, which I hope that will be sort of a cue for us to get more interns from UPM. We do have 4 of them now in our office. This is me and Architect Yasmin, my wife, and also part of the organization. Yeah. Let's move. Oh, okay. And our office, a fun bunch. We do take this daredevil office photo every time with no harness. So if you are come on board with us, you are going to be one of them. But of course, the stuff will be on the staircase lah, where the handrail is. And then we are in the cahoots of these 3 organizations. Qhawarizmi Architect mostly is a design strategic, practice, submissions, and all the commission will go under Practica, and MDRXA is doing all the research. And yeah, ada iklan sikit. This is our standard iklan portion of the talk. Follow us on TikTok, it's very educational. It talks about GBI, ESG, SDG, all those 3-letter words, plot ratio, density. Actually, I use it as my office repository, and of course, we've been featured everywhere. Okay, so I think I'm glad Shafik has covered some of these portion of the talk, and of course, Ngiom as well. Eventually, we need to understand architecture serves a utilitarian purpose as a shelter. We work within our context, the material that we could find, and we are fighting against the weather or other external factors that might affect or, give discomfort. And eventually that evolved to more urban setting, which they combine the 2 programs, but still maintain the climatic, responses. But eventually, I think if we want to move forward and look into what a future identity could be, we have to relook into the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Eventually, we can see that besides shelter, food are fairly important as well. Of course, as we grew, our cultural richness, we can get a little bit more out of that, self-identification, and of course, identity bangsa, national identity or identity of togetherness. It could go up to the hierarchical, and eventually, if we are confident enough, after self-esteem, we can achieve that self-actualization. But architecture serves as a baseline, as a foundation before we get there. And I would like to combine those two, shelter or architecture as a means of shelter, with food. And you can see that it is fairly basic. I think we can't fabricate air, so we leave it to God, and water. So we are sort of like in cahoots or in the mechanism to look at food and shelter. And obviously there's a lot of challenges, climate change one of them, and then basically people are no longer interested working in agricultural sector, and of course war. Eventually this will be one of the biggest contributor, what they call it, global instability. So you can see that it reflects on, for example, just previous few months, rice and of course chicken, due to the chicken feed and the supply of eggs that we have imported from India. So I will not go down to the specifics, but you know what's the effect are. And basically there are eventual fluctuation larger than normal, what they call it, inflation, due to this effect, the external effect, that will somehow bring into the effect of other things as well, including logistics, services and whatnot. So even though food is, could be a self-independent industry, but it's highly related to others. And in this particular region, we are no stranger to food insecurity. I think there is already a ministry that dedicated for this item. But unfortunately, in this particular region, especially Malaysia, we have a lot of malnourished children. It is well reported by international bodies. Of course, it doesn't look as hardcore as you have seen here, but it just help you to illustrate the situation within the region. And if we want to look at, nothing against Kelantan, Shafik, just facts, stunted growth by states. I'm not so sure what is the year. I think it's 2018, if not mistaken. And then basically it is fairly highly relatable to economic status or socio-economic status of domestic household. So, for example, almost 30% of children below 5, that within the household of 1,000 ringgit and below, having stunted growth. And obviously on the other side, on the flip side, there is also a prevailing obesity pandemic, or due to the fact that children are being either well fed, good for them, but on the other side is maybe fed with processed food. So there is a cycle within this, and I think as a country that relates culture, much of it culture or identity through food, I think it's fairly important for us to also, in a way, fix it through food. And then hopefully other things like architecture and things that we do change as well. So there are 4 pillars of food insecurity: availability. I think this is what people are confused about. How come Singapore has a better food security than us? I think it's just a matter of evaluating in these 4 metrics. It doesn't mean you have to produce the particular agricultural product, but if you do, it's even better. But if you don't, but you still have a good relation, your currency quite strong, you could buy those food in the market regardless of the spike inflation, stuff like that. It is still available to you. Number 2, access. Of course, I think this is fairly easy. Supermarket network and sundry shop network, I think this is not a problem. This is more logistical. Utilization, the amount of nutrients, I think this is also not that problematic. And stability, the consistency of the supply. So if you look at availability, I think we have some good points there. We produce our own food. We have our own infrastructure in a way. And then basically we have our food, abundance to a certain food produce, that we're able to import them. Access, I think as I mentioned, is more logistical. I think we have a good array of wet markets, supermarkets, sundry shop and whatnot. And for now, even though increasingly become more expensive, they are still affordable. and utilization of those food are fairly good as well. I don't think we have much problem there. This is some of the things that might have a bit of challenge, food supply stability, as I mentioned, the food that it relates to import, not really 100% import, even a partial import food produce will affect us when there is a major, for example, Indonesian last time, they don't allow export of palm oil, cooking palm oil, and of course India stopped their rice export. So the question now is, can we leverage architecture as a tool to alleviate our issues with food? I think this is again contention of real estate. There is two things. We need that we kind of need both. We need buildings as our shelter, as a means of economic growth, but at the same time we also need that real estate to produce food. And as I mentioned, we embodied ourselves with the pride of eating culture, culinary culture, of food as one of our major identity. their own food, hopefully we can increase our real estate efficiency to the factors of 98,000 for 100%, and eventually simplify, or to a certain extent, to a certain produce, simplify the chain to get it shorter and nearer to you. In an attempt to work it out on a larger scheme, this is a master plan competition of Relau Agricultural Station in Penang. We also find when there is come to shove, when necessity, strike, the identity of survival of that Macedonian needs of the food and shelter will come in and sort of like, in a way abandon the rest of the other 4 layers. Obviously, this area is flood prone, it's quite near to the airport, but there's a string of greeneries that we can, sort of like string together to become a sponge in this particular area that sort of like hinder water from the hillside. I'm sure you understand this is quite near to the where Penang central area is. It's quite hilly. So the site also, includes some of this hilly portion of the foothill of the particular Relau hills, and the agricultural land are trying to become 2 things: educationals and obviously improve ecosystem of that particular area. It's already existed, but is underperforming. So obviously we want to look at how can we make it a little bit more publicly notable. We want to ensure that first of all we move the main gate, of course, and try to bring a road marker that double as pedestrian and cyclist route to complete the loop inside the park. So the idea was really, again, performative, doing double duties, and I think that is the identity of the future. Just like your phones, where it could be a phone, a computer, and of course a camera, and architecture will have to do that as well. So it serves as a marker, as a pedestrian route, cyclist route, and it goes to this loop that goes around sort of like an exposition, looking at different parts of food production. And those food production are housed in this particular, sheds per se. Some of them are producing eggs, some of them cow's milk, goat milk, bees, honeys and whatnot, and of course the services for all those related administrative needs. And then there will be a trail in the orchard. This is particularly special because this is where all those Penang durian genes are being formulated. They call it durian germplasm, and then at the back is a rambutan germplasm. The idea was really to ensure that this biodiversity, where all these new cahoots of durian genes are preserved, and basically we just have a very light intervention in terms of a glamping site and then a restaurant and then observation. Of course, the main feature is really the water body, which is have to work together with the strings of other green areas like golf club and whatnot on the adjacent to the site, in order to combat the water coming down from the hillside and then flooding the area. So obviously, again, it serves as agricultural, cultivation for prawns and fish. On top of that is a place of recreation, but on the heavy rain days, it doubles as a duty as a basin to hold on water for the rest of the urban area. You can see there's a lot of flats just in front of our site. And eventually, when it dries down, it could be used again as productive or recreational activities. And they are defined by this array of boulevard, elevated boardwalks that goes around multiple agricultural plots, planting different, either obviously they are genetically modified, and then basically try to optimize. This is basically the research hotbed for new agricultural genetics and then where they actually test it out and try to, make do and combine two good traits of two different species and whatnot. So this is where the supporting areas are, the labs and training centers. And of course, we have a place where you can froze your durian for export. Yeah. And then of course, other agricultural activities. Again, the featured, future food museum are also there. And it becomes a complete 360 educational research and hopefully advocacy of sustainable food in the future. It works in the larger context as well as pollination agent for the island, and of course other good effects such as good high value jobs and whatnot. This is how it looks, and again it detached from any agricultural background that we have. Is technologically enabled. Obviously there's a lot of derivations of preservation of site. We try to make sure that the water bodies work within its intended role, but slightly better, upgraded, and touch lightly on areas that quite sensitive and valuable. I think there's no point of developing all those hilly sites. So we just focusing on all the developments on the frontal road, try to minimize our footprint. And then eventually, hopefully, it will double as or triple as or have a multifold effect to the rest of the island. Hopefully, I think this is a good reflection of what we can do in every little projects that we have. Or we going on forward, the opportunity to somehow produce something more than we should. I mean, not we should lah. Something double duties lah. I think there's a strong importance of having everything on double duty by addressing the climate, of course. At the same time, try to do more than what is been designed. And then basically preserving our food. I don't think we will be the same without nasi lemak, char kway teow, and all other things. That's why raya will not be the same without a chicken rendang or beef rendang. So if you like those things, and you think there is an identity of what raya should be or a ketupat leaf or whatnot should be, I think we need to protect our food in order to preserve that identity. So that's why in the office our ethos, our architecture is about everything except architecture. Obviously in this particular presentation today, I just showed to you that I talk about a bit more about food than the actual architecture, because I believe there's no point of having wall, doors, windows and roof if you don't have an idea of a larger upset of what that should be. And I think if your architecture is, how well you detail a handrail, how well a staircase thread is, I think maybe it's about time to look at how larger picture of what architecture do and what is the possibility of architecture that we, that we can contribute. Thank you so much.
Okay. Architect Kawa is about 1 minute early, so within time. Okay. Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to again congratulate ATSA architects. We have architect Haji Azim and architect Zulkaisa here with us today. Right, in support of their Perpetual Identity Design Lecture Series. Yeah? Okay, so thank you Architect Kawa for the lecture, for the talk, leveraging architecture with food produce, and also sharing his work on agriculture and food security and how architecture becomes an important part in this industry. Thank you all again to the speakers. Now we have come to the Q&A session. We hope to get some exchange of ideas to foster engagement between the audience and the speakers. So I would like to invite the speakers to the front. We have microphones, right? Okay. So we'll give like another 15 minutes for the question and answers. So I'm sure our speakers today will gladly entertain and respond to all your questions and views.
Yes.
Okay, hello. Would there be any questions from the audience? Yeah, first question. Tell us where you're from, your name and where you're from. Thanks.
Hello. Hi, good afternoon to our speakers and to the audience. My name is Dr. Sharizal. I'm an independent researcher, currently working on the research of identity of architecture in Malaysia. My question is to Shafik Kamarulzaman, architect, is about what you are discussing is about identity. You're talking about identity architecture and the architecture identity. But when we do try to find the origin of the words of identity, it came from the Latin words mean same. Then it evolved into the late Latin and to the French until it becomes identity. Means it's this quality of being identical. But the other word is character. Is the word came from Greek, a stepping tool or distinctive mark. Then evolved into Latin and Old French. So it's like a token or feature or a trait. So when you present your talk just now, what I see is more on character of a buildings. We are trying to buildings a character on the architecture. But when it comes to the identity, it's more like how all of us try to be the same and become a one identity as what Malaysia is, because we have trouble in Malaysia currently try to find architectural identity. So what of your opinion, because what you are discussing is quite wide in a sense. In your practice, because GDP, in your past practice with GDP, I saw GDP have some sorts of identity in the architecture, but does it mean a character? It also become a character of Malaysian architecture. So where are we moving forward in terms of identity and character of Malaysian architecture? I just want to know your opinions.
Dr.
Sharizan.
Sharizan, thanks for the question. I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that. So, but I'll try, because like I said, I'm not an authority on the subject. I can only, is this working? Yeah. You can hear me, yeah? I can only speak from experience. So, because I haven't done any thorough research or, studies on the subject. But all I know is that from the day I graduated and started working, it seems to be a preoccupation for Malaysia, I think specifically, but I think in general a lot of people talk about this thing about national identity, etc. So maybe my argument in the initial part of the presentation is a question. It's like, I think maybe before we answer the question about creating an identity, like you say, something that is repeated, so we create a character with identity in architecture. I think we have to maybe ask ourselves, like, is it really necessary? So perhaps it's a little bit, my presentation is more of a question rather than an answer. Because for me, I think in architecture, I'm a bit old school. I agree with a lot of what Kawa and Doc have presented. But I'm a bit old school because I think we architects, we are answering a practical call to produce buildings, okay? Whether it's important or not to have an identity, for me, I don't feel it's necessary. So, in my extensive years in practice in GDP as well as now on my own for the past 8 years, what I try to do is just to be true to the brief. And for me, being true to the brief are those things which sort of coincide with the principles of identity, which are what I keep mentioning, right? It's about context, it's about, so maybe it's a very simplistic approach to an idea of identity. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think like when what I practice in GDP, why I could stay there for so long and why I continue to practice in similar vein is because I believe that fundamentally good architecture is about good design. Good design is about appropriate response to context, to brief. Because at the end of the day, as architects, we are not artists, we are not working in a silo. We are paid to do something that will sell. So perhaps the definition of architecture itself comes into question. Because we are actually now, like I was talking to I can't remember who, we are actually making products that will sell. So there's a whole spectrum of architecture, you know, so you want to do architecture and study issues relating to identity, then perhaps not in our Malaysian context. So so perhaps that itself is an identity, kan? Because like when you drive around Klang Valley, I'm sorry to say, but our buildings lack character. Our buildings lack identity. But that is the identity perhaps, because our buildings evidently are driven by commercial demands. And as architects, I think more and more the challenge is not to give in entirely to those commercial demands, and to somehow, regardless of the brief and constraints, to give buildings character. In this case, in perhaps GDP's case, in my office case, the character is the designer. If you go and you look at my office philosophy, that is what distinguishes architecture from building. Anyone can do buildings, right? You train, you give it to a engineer, draftsman, or even a craftsman. They can make buildings. They've been doing it since, like what Doc was saying, centuries ago. There were no architects. So what differentiates and what gives buildings identity and character, for me, I think, is the person, the character, the spirit. That's what, because buildings have to be humane. So perhaps that's one thing I can share with you is what, actually this is my principle even before I joined GDP, is just to be true to the design, to be true to yourself, and to overcome the commercial demands and pressures. And the building will have its character and identity on its own. It doesn't have to be such a forced pursuit. I don't know if that answers your question, sorry. But yeah, that's my opinion.
All right, thanks, Architect Shafik. Dr. Ngiom, would you want to share your views or thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, everything that Shafik said, right, it rings true in practice. And while thinking about the architecture that you do, right, you have an external environment that determines the outcome. It's not just you. And of course, architecture can be willful as well. Like say, you know, like many examples of deliberately iconic buildings or signature buildings, so on, willfully out to create some kind of identity, right, for the company, for the country, or whatever it is. Then, in the bigger picture, life carries on with 90% of the buildings, which are done within context, within time. You have sometimes you could say that buildings are so blunt, you know, built during that period. But then there's also the context that include commercial requirements, economic requirements, and so on. So it falls into that, you know. So since the topic emerges in my mind, right, given by Azim, I was thinking about it, you know, and it's actually a slippery thing. Actually, you could almost say that in different times, in different contexts, you know, we repeat one another. Geographical condition, climatic condition, it actually determines the majority of the architecture anyway. Occasionally you have, like during our medieval period, real full iconic buildings, you know, but amidst in the external environment, everything else is as it is. Shop house, the couple houses and so on, which are done by the ordinary people as they need them, built under economic conditions and so on. It's just a long form conversation. And I don't think, to me, at the end of the day, you can define clearly identity in architecture. You know, it is just a term that you can use it, and you can do a long form conversation, essay, whatever it is. But different time, different period, it changes. Even sentiment changes, you know, so forth. So it's a slippery thing, yeah.
All right, thank you, Doctor. All right. Any other questions from the floor? Okay, if not, I want to ask Architect Kawa on food, agriculture, real estate. So, what is your vision, or what is your view on the country's future direction on that aspect, as an architect, and then also as one of the think tank, yeah, in the MDRXA.
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate, maybe I just summarize what I'm trying to share in this lecture just now. I did say that in short, my identification or my interpretation of perpetual identity is as follows. Architecture is meant to house a machine, either it's a domestic household or people producing fabrics, but architecture must do something for someone, for a group of people. And I identify humans as a perpetual food eater, unless you are on strike or whatnot. So that's why there's important for us to look at this. And obviously architecture is also a vehicle of capital. You want to convert 100 million to 200 million, and the best, not the best lah, but without discounting the financial instrument, the futures, the stock and whatnot, architecture is one of the largest thing that you could build. And then basically you can see that in the Middle East, how they transform their region using architecture. So in terms of with that in mind, we are at the tipping point where it might be a bit more profitable to do a vertical farm than rent the space out for an office. So let's say an office is like in KL 4-5 ringgit per square feet. If you could farm 4 and 5 ringgit per square feet worth of vegetables, I mean, it's not that hard if you are focusing on high value crops like what do you call it, oyster, king oyster, and all those, sorry, oyster, I'm relating to mushroom, mushroom delicacies or vanilla or high value crops. It's not that difficult to get that 4 to 5 ringgit per square footage. It's all about economics. And of course, when you talk about let's say a 20-story what do you call it, farm versus a 20-story office, you need less finishes. It could be as bare as possible, and there could be an identity of to put it bluntly, slave buildings. Because I live in Cyberjaya, where all the 70% of Malaysian data centers are, and we have these faceless, nameless slave buildings that only identified by numbers, and then Microsoft are building another one very near to my house, $1 billion what do you call it, data center. That actually as important as food. I mean, if my kids don't get their internet, cannot log into their Roblox, they will die. So we will have more of that. And I think the transition the willingness is not there yet, because we again agrarian communities, we believe food should be farmed on the ground. But in a few years time, if the food keep on escalating as they are right now, I don't think it will be so ridiculous to see, because we already have chicken farming, egg farms on a building right now. It's not something new. It's just that maybe it's away from the public eye. So people thought it is free-fed, free-range chicken, but they are not. Their body is heavier than their feet can uphold. They can't even stand. So this is the brutal reality of farming, and not those fancy community urban farm in a podium in a service apartment. I'm not talking about those balconies, those small office balcony that nobody harvesting those plots of so-called sky garden or whatever the developers want to coin it. In reality of agricultural building as harsh as what they call it, a sweatshop in Bangladesh maybe, or even worse. It's a very tough business, dirty business, nobody want to get into. But I think eventually it will come to a point where we need to look into that. Obviously poultry having a big impact due to partially because of the what they call it, the dak ayam harga naik because of Ukraine. That's one. Another one is actually a lot of those chicken shed has no KM, kebenaran merancang, because they are not properly built as a building with a fire code, etc. But there is that's why PM say ada one statement tu yang dia cakap boleh fast track approval. Sebenarnya it meant for the chicken shed, not for the whole construction industry, just meant for that. So maybe in the future we'll have more exemption, more special laws on this slave architecture, slave building that has zero human intervention and is meant for us to live.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we have to face the fact that whatever, industry that we're into, food industry is actually the most important thing, because for you to live you need food. Yeah. All right. Okay. Are there any further questions from the floor? No.
And actually we are quite privileged. If you look at our average food portion to neighboring countries like Vietnam or Indonesia, it's quite huge. Our portion. If I go to Indonesia, I will order 2 plates usually. Yeah. Because the portion is so small. But we are in portion. This. Very
generous
privileged.
Portion.
Yeah, very generous.
Okay. All right. So I guess the 3 speakers actually sums up on perpetual identity, where architect Shafik talks about contextual, identity. How identity actually derive from the context itself. Climate, geography, and Dr. Ngiom brought us way back, to history, and architect Kawa actually talks more about future, what lies ahead, and the scarcity of land and such. So I guess if there's no more question, I would like to then adjourn. Pass the forum to architect Mio. So let me, architect Mio, so I just pass this to you.
Okay, thank you, Architect Sateerah, and our 3 speakers, Architect Shafik, Architect Ngiom, and Architect Kawa. And a reminder to our audience, if you have not registered for your CPD point, please do so at the main entrance of our hall. And also after this, there will be snack, our own perpetual nasi lemak with daun pisang to be served by our sponsor, ATSA Architects. So for our token of appreciation, I would like to invite Architect Zulkasa and Architect Azim to hand over the souvenir to our speakers and our moderator. So can I have Architect Shafik to receive our souvenir? So this is a sketch by Architect Zulkasa of our city skyline. Photographer. Please hand back. So. Back. Okay. One more shot. Alright, thank you, Shafik. And next, Architect Ngiom. And last but not least, Architect Kawa. And of course, our moderator, Architect Sateerah. And can we have a group photo, speakers? Yeah, on the stage. Okay. I think I would want to join also.